The Tower of London's brutal punishments reached their grotesque peak on a May morning in 1541, when 67-year-old Margaret Pole ran for her life around the scaffold, while an executioner chased her with an axe. The third strike had just whistled past her ear, missing completely as she dodged away from the block. The crowd, packed shoulder to shoulder on Tower Hill, gasped in horror as this elderly countess, the last of the Plantagenets, refused to kneel for her own beheading. The executioner, already sweating through his hood, stumbled after her with his heavy blade raised. This wasn't how executions were supposed to go. Noble prisoners typically died in one clean stroke, their dignity intact even in death. But Margaret Pole's execution would require 11 strikes before her head finally separated from her body, each blow landing on her shoulders, back and neck as she fought to escape. The screams from the crowd grew louder with each failed attempt. Some turned away, unable to watch as England's judicial system devolved into a butcher's yard. Others stood frozen, witnessing the moment when state-sanctioned execution revealed itself as nothing more than murder with paperwork. But how did England's symbol of royal power transform into a factory of botched executions, and why did the Tower's victims often pay for their own deaths? You're about to discover how a fortress built to protect London became its most feared killing ground, where prisoners funded their own torture and executioners collected tips based on their victims' screams. To understand how judicial execution became sanctioned savagery, we need to rewind 450 years to when William the Conqueror first looked at the Thames and decided London needed a reminder of who held the axe. The hammering never stopped. Day and night, for 11 years, the conquered Anglo-Saxons heard their subjugation being built one stone at a time. Each strike of the mason's chisel carved deeper into their collective defeat. The White Tower rose from the banks of the Thames like a stone fist, 90 feet of Norman dominance that cast its shadow across London's wooden houses and thatched roofs. Elfric the stoneworker felt the rope burns on his palms as he hauled another limestone block up the wooden scaffolding. His grandfather had fought at Hastings. Now Elfric built monuments for the men who'd killed him. The Norman overseers counted every stone, measured every course of mortar, but they never counted the Saxon dead who'd fallen from these heights. The walls grew thicker as they rose, the 15 feet of solid stone at the base, tapering as they climbed toward the London sky. Each block weighed more than a man could lift alone. The Saxons worked in teams, grunting in their native tongue while Norman guards shouted orders in French. But the stones themselves spoke a universal language of conquest. Winter construction proved the worst. Mortar froze before it could set properly, forcing the workers to mix it with blood from slaughtered cattle, in Idala, and when cattle ran short, with their own blood from split hands and crushed fingers. The tower demanded its tribute even before the first prisoner arrived. The cold made the stones slippery. 3 men fell to their deaths in January alone, their bodies crumpling on the frozen ground below. William the Conqueror visited the construction site weekly, his mounted retinue forcing the workers to kneel in the mud and stone dust. He'd point with his gloved hand at sections that displeased him, and the Saxon workers would tear down days of labour to rebuild according to his vision. The king understood architecture as warfare by other means. The tower's design came from Normandy, but its purpose was purely English. Unlike Norman castles built for defence, this fortress faced inward, its arrow slits and murder holes positioned to control London's population rather than repel foreign invaders. Every architectural choice reinforced a simple message: I my knee. Resistance was suicide. The spiral staircases turned clockwise, favouring right-handed Norman defenders against Saxon attackers climbing up. The walls contained no windows below 30 feet, turning the lower floors into perfect prison cells. Elfric learned to read the tower's future in its stones. The chapel on the second floor told him nobles would die here. Only the highborn rated proximity to God in their final moments. The underground chambers, where moisture already seeped through fresh mortar, whispered of darker purposes. He recognized torture chambers from their drainage channels before the first rack arrived. The Normans paid the Saxon workers in bread and ale, never coins that might fund rebellion. But the real payment was survival, MRCE, work on the tower, or join the Saxon nobles who'd already lost their heads. Elfric had watched his former lord's execution at the temporary gallows near the construction site. The message was clear: build your own cage or decorate it with your corpse. Spring brought faster progress but worse conditions. The Thames flooded, turning the construction site into a muddy hell. Workers sank knee-deep in the mire while still hauling stones. The floodwater mixed with sewage from London's streets, spreading disease through the work camps. But construction never paused. The tower rose from the filth like England's new reality: brutal, unforgiving, and permanent. By summer of the 10th year, the tower's outline dominated London's skyline. Church bells seemed quieter in its shadow. Markets relocated rather than operate beneath its walls. Even the Thames appeared to flow faster past its foundations, as if the river itself wanted to escape. The psychological warfare had already begun, and the building wasn't even finished. The final year brought the most specialized construction: the mechanisms of control, iron rings embedded in stone walls, channels carved into floors for purposes the Saxon workers pretended not to understand. Aelfric installed a pulley system in a chamber deep underground, following Norman specifications he couldn't read. Only later would he learn he'd built the machinery for the rack that would stretch Saxon bodies until they split. The tower was complete. Now it needed its first victim, and King William had already chosen who would christen England's new monument to fear. The executioner counted his coins: £4 for a beheading, 8 for a hanging. Death had become a government job with standardized rates. Each silver piece clinked against the others in his leather pouch as he tallied the week's earnings. 3 beheadings, 2 hangings, £28 total, more than most craftsmen earned in 6 months. The tower's first professional executioner arrived in 1235, appointed by Henry III with the same bureaucratic efficiency used to hire tax collectors. His name was Geoffrey of Essex, though history would remember him only by his trade. The position came with an annual salary of £23, roughly £15,000 in today's money, plus fees for each execution performed. Geoffrey kept meticulous records in a leather-bound ledger: hanging, £8, beheading, £4, burning, £12, drawing and quartering, £16, paid in instalments as each phase completed. The Crown had transformed judicial killing into a fee schedule. Every method of death carried its own price tag, itemized like goods at market. The pricing structure revealed the government's priorities. Hangings paid double because they took longer, requiring more showmanship. A good executioner could stretch a hanging for 20 minutes, letting the crowd watch as the condemned danced on air. Beheadings ended too quickly for proper spectacle, métiers. One swing, one thud, show over. The audience barely had time to gasp. Tower Hill became London's most profitable theatre. The permanent scaffold rose 15 feet high, specially engineered to give 10,000 spectators clear sightlines. Carpenters reinforced the platform monthly, billing the Crown for materials and labour. Even the scaffold steps required constant repair from the weight of condemned nobles climbing to their deaths. But one execution would cost far more than the standard rate. Geoffrey's successor, John Cratwell, discovered the hidden expenses of the execution trade. Tools didn't come cheap. A proper executioner's axe cost £2, nearly a month's base salary. The blade required weekly sharpening by London's finest smiths, who charged premium rates for working on instruments of death. Cratwell's expense reports show 3 shillings monthly for whetstones alone. The executioner's hood, that iconic symbol of anonymous death, cost 6 shillings from the tailor on Thames Street. Black wool, specially woven to breathe during summer executions while hiding the executioner's identity. Cratwell ordered 2 annually. Bloodstains proved impossible to remove completely. His laundress charged extra for handling the soiled garments. Then came the bribes. Guards expected payment for allowing the executioner early access to size up his victims. Tall prisoners required different axe angles than short ones. Fat necks needed more force than thin. These reconnaissance missions cost a shilling per visit, paid from the executioner's own pocket. Knowledge meant cleaner kills, and cleaner kills meant better tips from victims' families. Families paid handsomely for mercy strokes. £10 guaranteed their loved one would die on the first swing. £20 bought the sharpest axe and the executioner's soberest mourning. One duchess paid £50 to ensure her husband felt nothing. Cratwell spent the night before practicing on pig carcasses to perfect his aim. The executioner's price list was about to include a new service. Professional executioners developed specialties. William Calcraft perfected the short drop, hanging that slowly strangled victims while their legs kicked for the crowd's entertainment. Thomas Derrick invented an improved gallows with his name, the Derrick, that could hang 23 people simultaneously. Each innovation commanded premium fees. The Tower's execution economy supported an entire ecosystem. Scaffold builders earned steady wages. Crowd control required 50 guards at twopence each per execution. Street vendors paid license fees to sell food and ale to spectators. Even the ravens got their cut. Legend claimed they'd abandon the tower if denied their portion of executed flesh. Souvenir sellers made fortunes from execution days. Scraps of the condemned's clothing sold for a penny. Splinters from the scaffold commanded sixpence. Enterprising merchants dipped handkerchiefs in pools of noble blood, then sold them for a shilling as cure-alls. The executioner himself sold the rope after hangings. A foot of noose rope fetched 2 shillings from sailors who believed it brought luck at sea. The condemned contributed to their own deaths financially. Tower prisoners paid for everything: food, bedding, candles, even the straw that would soak up their blood. Noble prisoners faced itemized bills: cell rental at 5 shillings daily, meals at 3 pence each, plus charges for visitors, writing materials, and final confessor fees. Many faced bankruptcy before execution. The Tower's account books from 1392 show Lord Furnivall paid £12 for his final week's accommodations. This included fresh rushes for his cell floor, beeswax candles instead of tallow, and wine with his meals. His execution fee, listed as final services rendered, added another £4. Death came with invoices, but execution costs could spiral beyond any standardized rate. Sir Thomas Wyatt's 1554 beheading required 3 axes after the first 2 shattered on impact. Each replacement blade cost £2, billed to Wyatt's estate. The executioner charged an additional hazard fee for the unexpected difficulty. Wyatt's family received a bill for £14, i.e. £10 more than a standard beheading. When Henry VIII wanted his wife dead, he discovered even royal murder came with premium pricing. The bill for Anne Boleyn's special treatment would shock even him. £23 sterling. That's what King Henry paid to import a French swordsman from Calais, £7,000 in today's money, just to ensure Anne Boleyn's head came off in one stroke. The payment records survive in the Tower archives, itemised down to the last penny. Travel expenses from France, £4. Lodging at the Swan Inn, 12 shillings. The sword itself, specially forged in Lyon, £6. Even the executioner's breakfast on the morning of May 19th, 1536, appears in the accounts: bread, ale, and cold beef, charged to the royal purse at 3 pence. The French swordsman arrived in London 3 days before the execution. Unlike English executioners who wielded axes, this specialist carried a sword 4 feet long, its blade thin as parchment but sharp enough to slice silk dropped across its edge. He spent those 3 days at the Tower, measuring distances, calculating angles, practicing his footwork on the scaffold, while carpenters reinforced the platform for the peculiar requirements of a sword execution. Standard executions used a block. The condemned knelt, placed their neck across the wood, and waited for the axe to fall. Simple, predictable, occasionally botched when the executioner missed his mark. Anne Boleyn's death would follow different rules. The French method required the condemned to kneel upright, their neck extended but unsupported, a position that demanded perfect timing and precision from the executioner. One miscalculation meant the difference between a clean death and mutilation. Henry's investment in this elaborate execution revealed more than royal courtesy toward his soon-to-be dead wife. The king, who'd split from Rome over this woman, now paid a fortune to ensure her death appeared merciful. Every pound spent on the French executioner was a pound invested in royal reputation. A botched execution might suggest divine disapproval of the king's justice. A clean death proved God's blessing on the proceedings. The morning of the execution, the French swordsman made an unusual request. He asked that Anne Boleyn face away from him at the crucial moment. English crowds expected to see the condemned's face as the blade fell, to witness the exact moment life left their eyes. The swordsman's method denied them this satisfaction. He would call for his sword only after Anne positioned herself, then strike while she looked toward the chapel, her final view being the place she'd married Henry just 3 years before. Anne's execution outfit cost more than most Londoners earned in a year. Her ladies spent the night of May 18th sewing pearls onto a grey damask gown. The records show charges for seamstress overtime, rush delivery of Irish linen for her cap, and even the red petticoat she wore beneath everything else. A final act of defiance, since red was the colour of martyrdom. Her execution costume totalled £47, more than twice the cost of importing her executioner. The scaffold itself received special modifications for this premium execution. Carpenters installed a French-style platform, lower than the standard English scaffold, but wider, to accommodate the swordsman's lateral strike. They covered the boards in black cloth that cost £2 per yard, imported from Flanders specifically for royal executions. Even the straw spread to absorb blood was fresh, not the weeks-old stuff used for common criminals. Every detail reinforced the message that this was no ordinary death. The Tower's expense ledger for May 19th shows peculiar entries. Payment to 6 trumpeters who announced Anne's arrival at the scaffold. Fees for the Calais interpreter who ensured the French executioner understood the protocol. Charges for the velvet bag that would hold the Queen's severed head, embroidered with her coat of arms by London's finest needleworkers. Death came dressed in luxury when the condemned could afford it. The swordsman himself commanded unprecedented payment terms. Unlike English executioners who collected fees after the job, he demanded half his payment in advance, deposited with Lombard Street bankers. The remaining half would be paid only upon satisfactory completion, a phrase that appears nowhere else in Tower execution records. His contract specified payment in French gold coins, not English silver. Even the exchange rate appears in the Tower accounts, calculated to the 4th decimal place. Witnesses paid premium prices for proximity to this exclusive execution. The scaffold's front row seats, usually free to whoever arrived earliest, sold for £2 each to courtiers who wanted to report every detail back to Henry. The Tower's constable collected these fees personally, recording each payment in a separate ledger marked Special Arrangements. By dawn, every viewing spot within 50 feet of the scaffold had been monetized. The execution economy extended beyond the moment of death. Anne's ladies negotiated fees for collecting her body, preparing it for burial, and even for the cloths used to wrap her head. The Tower carpenter charged 3 shillings to modify her arrow chest into a makeshift coffin, since no one had prepared a proper burial box for a queen. Her final resting place in the Tower chapel required payment to the gravediggers, the priest, and even the boy who rang the burial bell. All this expense for 30 seconds of sword work. The French executioner positioned himself to Anne's right, outside her peripheral vision. When she knelt on the platform, he called to his assistant for his sword, a predetermined signal that made Anne turn her head slightly toward the sound. In that instant of distraction, the blade whistled through the morning air. The strike was so swift, so precise, that witnesses swore her lips still moved in prayer after her head left her shoulders. The executioner's perfection justified every penny of Henry's investment. No missed strikes, no struggling, no unseemly scrambling such as common executions often produced. Anne Boleyn died like a queen, her death as choreographed as any court masque. The French swordsman collected his remaining payment within the hour, and departed London that same afternoon, leaving behind only his signature on the receipt for £23 sterling. Word of Anne's elegant death spread through London within hours. Witnesses spoke of the executioner's grace, the Queen's composure, the theatrical precision of French justice. Henry had purchased more than a clean death. He'd bought the illusion that executing queens could be civilized, that judicial murder became acceptable when performed with sufficient style and expense. Future Tower prisoners would learn otherwise. Most would face English axes wielded by English hands, their deaths priced according to standard rates rather than royal paranoia. Anne's merciful end was the exception. Most Tower prisoners discovered that their final moments would involve a very different kind of currency, their own money paying for their imprisonment, feeding the Tower's bureaucracy of death while they waited for executioners who charged by the stroke, not by the success. Sir Thomas More reached into his purse and counted. 12 pennies left. At 1 penny per day for food and fuel, he had 12 days before starvation became his executioner. The former Lord Chancellor of England now calculated survival in copper coins, each one buying another sunrise in his 13 by 15-foot cell beneath the bell tower. His fingers, once used to signing death warrants, now trembled as they sorted through his dwindling fortune. The Tower's fee structure transformed imprisonment into slow-motion execution. Every prisoner paid for their own captivity. 1 penny daily for bread and water, another halfpenny for a bundle of straw, 3 farthings for a candle that lasted 6 hours. The bills arrived each morning with breakfast, itemised on parchment that cost prisoners an additional farthing to read. More's cell came with premium charges, 5 pence weekly for its proximity to the chapel, 2 pence daily for the window that leaked rain but admitted light, plus a maintenance fee for the iron rings embedded in his walls. The guards kept ledgers as detailed as any merchant's accounts. William Kingston, the Tower's constable, recorded every transaction in books that survive today. More's entry shows payments for June and July of 1535. Neat columns of numbers that tracked his transformation from England's highest legal authority to a man bartering his shoe buckles for firewood. The mathematics of misery filled page after page, pounds and shillings and pence adding up to profit margins built on human suffering. More discovered the Tower's cruelest economy involved time itself. Rich prisoners could purchase speedier trials, bribing clerks to move their names up the docket. Poor prisoners rotted for years awaiting judgment, their families selling everything to keep them fed while legal proceedings crawled forward. The Tower's unofficial motto might have been "Justice delayed is justice monetized." Each postponement cost the accused another month's worth of fees, another debt their estates would settle after execution. The pricing revealed priorities as clear as any royal decree. A bed cost 3 pence nightly. Straw on stone came free. Writing materials commanded luxury prices. 2 shillings for a quill, 18 pence for ink, a full crown for enough paper to draft a letter. The Tower knew desperate men would pay anything to communicate with the outside world. More spent his shoe-buckle money on charcoal and smuggled paper, scratching out his final work while his stomach cramped from hunger. But More found a way to smuggle out more than just words. The former Chancellor had friends among the guards, men who remembered his kindness during better days. They turned blind eyes when his daughter Margaret visited, pretending not to notice the papers hidden in her sleeves. These manuscripts would become The Sadness of Christ, More's meditation on suffering written with burnt wood on scraps of cloth when paper ran out. Each page that escaped the Tower cost another bribe, another day without food, another step toward the skeletal figure who would mount the scaffold. The Tower charged for everything except death itself. That came free, eventually. Visitors paid gatehouse fees, plus tips to guards for unlocking cells. Lawyers demanded payment before entering the Tower grounds, knowing imprisoned clients couldn't haggle over rates. Even priests expected donations for last rites, their prayers priced by the verse. More watched his wealth drain away penny by penny, a fortune that once funded scholarly libraries now buying mouldy bread and rat-gnawed blankets. Some prisoners attempted escape through bankruptcy rather than bribery. They declared insolvency, throwing themselves on royal mercy. The Tower's response was swift and merciless. Debtors transferred to the worst cells, the underground chambers where water rose ankle-deep during Thames floods. These accommodations came rent-free because few survived them long enough to accumulate bills. The Tower had perfected capitalism's darkest equation. Those who couldn't pay faced death by economics rather than execution. More's accounts show increasing desperation as 1535 progressed. Charges for special requests appeared more frequently. A halfpenny for fresh air walks, 2 pence for chapel visits, 6 pence for a razor to maintain dignity. The Tower monetized every human need, every small comfort, every trace of the life prisoners once knew. Even family letters arrived with delivery fees, emotional blackmail at 2 pence per page. His final month's expenses tell their own story. No more charges for writing materials. The words had all been written. No more visitor fees. Margaret knew her father's time was ending. Just bread, water, and weekly confessor visits at 3p each. Moore paid his last bill on the morning of July 6th, settling his account with coins borrowed from his daughter. The Tower's ledgers show him dying debt-free, a final victory over a system designed to extract wealth alongside life. The guards found something unexpected in Moore's cell after his execution. Hidden beneath loose stones lay written accounts of every prisoner he'd observed, their struggles with Tower fees documented in charcoal on cloth. These records revealed men selling their teeth to barbers for denture makers, women trading their hair to wig merchants, children born in the Tower, and charged rent from their first breath. Moore had created an economy of suffering written in soot and hidden in stone. What his jailers discovered would change Tower policy forever. Moore's smuggled writings exposed the Tower's fee system to public scrutiny. Pamphlets printed from his prison manuscripts spread through London's streets, revealing how the Crown profited from prisoners' misery. The public learned of men dying with bills pinned to their corpses, of families ruined by jail fees that continued even after execution. The Tower's economy of death faced its first audit, conducted by a dead man whose words outlived his executioners. The constable ordered Moore's cell searched stone by stone. They found more than writing. They discovered an entire network of prisoner communications. Messages passed through cracks, stories shared between cells, a community of the condemned that transcended stone walls. The Tower had monetized bodies but couldn't price souls. Moore's legacy lived in the scratches on cell walls, the hidden papers, the proof that even in humanity's darkest marketplace, some things remained beyond purchase. Prison reforms followed slowly, grudgingly, but they followed. The exposed fee system became harder to justify when everyone knew its details. Moore had paid for his imprisonment with more than coins. He'd purchased immortality with documentation, trading his comfort for evidence that would outlive the Tower itself. His final balance sheet showed credits no accountant could calculate, conscience maintained, truth preserved, justice served with charcoal and cloth. The Tower adapted, as it always did. New fees replaced old ones. Creative billing found fresh opportunities. The machinery of monetized imprisonment ground on, but now the public watched its gears turn. Moore's greatest victory came not from martyrdom but from mathematics, his careful accounting of cruelty ensuring that future prisoners would at least suffer in better documented conditions. While Moore counted pennies in his cell, the Tower's strangest residents were about to arrive, and they wouldn't be human. Their upkeep would cost the Crown more than any prisoner, their presence transforming the Tower from mere prison to something far more peculiar, a royal zoo where exotic beasts lived better than condemned men, where lions fed on the finest meat while prisoners starved on spoiled bread. The chain measured exactly 30 feet, long enough for the polar bear to reach the Thames, short enough to remind London that royal power extended even to Arctic predators. The massive white beast splashed into the murky water while crowds gathered on London Bridge to watch this impossible sight, a creature from the frozen north fishing for salmon where convicted pirates usually dangled from. Gibbets. Henry III's newest acquisition had arrived that morning in October 1252, a gift from King Haakon of Norway delivered in a reinforced cage that took 20 men to haul from the docks. The bear's keeper, a Norwegian named Magnus, spoke no English but understood the universal language of royal commands. His job was simple: keep the beast alive, keep it visible, keep London talking about their king's magnificent collection. The Tower's account books from that October show peculiar entries between execution fees and torture equipment maintenance. £6 monthly for fresh fish, delivered twice daily from Billingsgate Market. 3 shillings for the iron collar, forged by the same smiths who made prisoners' shackles. 8p weekly for the chain's upkeep, the links worn smooth by constant submersion in Thames water. Even Arctic monsters generated paperwork in England's most bureaucratic death house. Magnus lived in the Lion Tower with his charge, sleeping on straw that cost the same penny per bundle as prisoners' bedding. His quarters sat directly above the bear's den, close enough to hear every growl and splash through the floorboards. The Norwegian learned to interpret each sound, contentment after feeding, frustration when the Thames yielded no fish, the particular grunt that meant storms approached. He'd crossed the North Sea to become London's strangest servant, tending a beast whose very existence mocked the starving prisoners in cells barely 50 yards away. The polar bear wasn't Henry's first exotic acquisition. 3 years earlier, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II had sent an elephant, the first in England since the Romans departed. The beast stood 13 feet tall at the shoulder, consumed 200 pounds of hay daily, and terrified every horse within a half-mile radius. Its trumpeting echoed across Tower grounds at dawn, a sound that would haunt listeners' dreams for nights afterward. The elephant's keeper, brought from Sicily specifically for the task, lasted exactly 17 days before the magnitude of his responsibility broke him. Imagine maintaining a creature that could crush you with a casual step, whose dietary needs cost more than feeding 30 prisoners, whose very presence transformed the tower from prison to circus. The keeper's replacement found his predecessor's journal, pages filled with increasingly frantic calculations of hay consumption and sketches of the elephant's eye, drawn over and over as if trying to understand what thoughts lived behind that ancient gaze. London had never seen anything like the tower's menagerie. Lions prowled in cages where condemned lords once awaited trial. Leopards paced on platforms built from recycled scaffolding. A lynx from Sweden occupied a cell recently vacated by a convicted heretic, the walls still scratched with desperate prayers now covered by claw marks. Each beast lived in better conditions than most of London's human population, fed regular meals while children starved in Southwark slums. The message wasn't subtle. Henry III collected exotic animals the way other kings collected crown jewels, displaying power through possession of the impossible. Every roar that drifted from the tower reminded subjects of their place in the royal food chain. The king, who could cage polar bears and command elephants, could certainly control mere humans. The tower's dual identity, APAP prison and zoo, created a perfect metaphor for royal authority. Both functions involved captivity, spectacle, and the reduction of living beings to entertainment. Feeding time became London's strangest attraction. Twice daily, crowds gathered to watch the Norwegian Magnus lead his polar bear to the Thames on that 30-foot chain. The beast's technique fascinated observers. The patient waiting, the lightning-quick plunge when fish swam close, the satisfied shake as it emerged, with salmon clenched in massive jaws. Street vendors set up stalls selling meat pies and ale to spectators who treated executions and animal feedings with equal enthusiasm. The economics proved staggering. That single polar bear's upkeep cost £23 annually, the same amount Henry would later spend importing Anne Boleyn's executioner. The elephant's expenses reached £40 yearly before its death in 1257, allegedly from drinking too much wine provided by amused courtiers. Each exotic resident represented wealth that could have fed entire villages, maintained roads, or funded hospitals. Instead, it brought the king international prestige and domestic propaganda. Keepers developed specialized knowledge worth fortunes. The lion keeper from Barbary commanded triple a skilled craftsman's wages, his expertise in managing 6 adult cats making him irreplaceable. He alone knew which lion responded to which call, how to enter cages without triggering attacks, when females would birth cubs that survived. His predecessor had lasted 1 week before a lioness removed his left arm at the shoulder. Experience in the tower's menagerie came written in scar tissue. The smell overwhelmed visitors long before they saw the animals. Wet fur, rotting meat, and animal waste created an atmosphere that permeated clothing and hair. Noble ladies held perfumed cloths to their faces while touring the cages, their delicate sensibilities assaulted by scents their castle halls never contained. The tower's dual nature reached even into its air, the sterile stone smell of prison cells mixing with the wild musk of predators. Some creatures served darker purposes. The tower's ravens, those prophetic birds whose departure supposedly spelled England's doom, began as menagerie overflow. Fed on execution remains, they developed a taste for human flesh that keepers encouraged. Their presence transformed from accident to tradition, their cawing providing soundtrack to both royal spectacle and judicial murder. Even today, their descendants patrol tower grounds, living links to when the fortress hosted nature's killers alongside human ones. Winter challenged every keeper's ingenuity. The elephant required a specially constructed shelter with bronze braziers that burned constantly from October through March. Its heating bill alone reached £15 per winter, more than most London merchants earned annually. The tropical cats huddled in their cages, their roars taking on desperate tones as Thames fog rolled through iron bars. Only the polar bear thrived, its Arctic heritage making London winters seem mild. Magnus often found his charge sleeping contentedly in snowdrifts while lions shivered nearby. The menagerie's most disturbing resident arrived in 1255, a white bear from Greenland that chroniclers insisted was most strange and wonderful to behold. This wasn't another polar bear, but something else, a creature whose description matches no known Arctic animal. It stood upright like a man, covered in white fur, with hands instead of paws. The keeper assigned to it quit after 3 nights, claiming the beast watched him with eyes that held too much knowing. Modern historians suspect an albino bear with deformities, but contemporary accounts describe behavior no bear ever exhibited. This creature's accommodation cost more than all others combined. It required a special stone house with iron doors, guards posted constantly, and meat delivered in ways that kept keepers from seeing it feed. The tower's expense records show payments to priests for special blessings on its enclosure, holy water sprinkled weekly on thresholds, and silver crosses installed at every entrance. Whatever this white bear was, those who saw it believed it required spiritual as well as physical containment. The royal menagerie served its propaganda purpose perfectly. Foreign ambassadors touring the tower encountered England's might displayed in living metaphor. Dangerous beasts controlled, exotic creatures commanded, the impossible made routine. The message reached every level of society. If the king could chain polar bears and cage elephants, what chance did mere human rebels have? The tower's animals became symbols more powerful than any coat of arms, breathing representations of royal reach that extended to Earth's furthest corners. But maintaining this illusion carried hidden costs beyond the financial. Keepers died regularly, mauled by animals or poisoned by infected wounds. The elephant keeper's assistant, a boy of 12, was crushed against cage bars during a feeding. The lynx killed 2 handlers before anyone learned it could leap twice its apparent range. Each death was recorded in tower logs with the same bureaucratic indifference used for prisoner executions. Human lives reduced to operational expenses in the zoo's bloody ledger. The animals themselves suffered in ways their wild nature never intended. The polar bear developed skin conditions from Thames pollution. Lions went mad from confinement, pacing until their paws bled, roaring at walls that never yielded. The elephant's death in 1257 came after months of obvious distress. Shiges, chroniclers describe it weeping human-like tears, refusing food, standing motionless for days. Even royal captivity couldn't overcome nature's rebellion against stone cages. The menagerie's peak came during Edward I's reign, when the collection included an African elephant, a gift from Louis IX of France. This beast proved even more expensive than its predecessor, requiring a wooden house 40 feet long and 20 feet wide. The structure cost £18 to build, more than some manor houses. Its daily diet included a gallon of wine mixed with its water, based on keepers' beliefs that alcohol prevented melancholy in captive elephants. The theory proved false. This elephant also died within 2 years, its body requiring a special crane to remove from tower grounds. By 1300, the Tower Menagerie had become England's first public zoo, charging admission to supplement royal funding. 1 penny bought access to the Lion Tower, while 3 pence gained entry to the Elephant House and polar bear feeding shows. These fees went directly to keepers' salaries, creating incentive to acquire ever more spectacular beasts. The tower's transformation from fortress to tourist attraction had begun, funded by public fascination with controlled wildness. The exotic animals were just warm-ups for the tower's real spectacles. Nothing drew crowds like the scheduled destruction of a human being, and the tower was about to perfect the art of turning execution into England's bloodiest form of theatre. The quill scratched across parchment in the darkness, each stroke revealing nightmares that daylight couldn't erase. Thomas Derrick bent over his desk by candlelight, recording another name in his private ledger of the dead. Lord Pemberton, 2 FI, 3 strikes. The Countess of Wiltshire, 1 clean cut. The merchant from Cheapside, whose name he never learned, 7 attempts before the head finally separated. Each night I see their faces, he wrote, the ink still wet on the page. Noble and common alike, in the moment before the blade falls. They never leave me. Derek had inherited the executioner's post from his father in 1528, back when he believed death could be a profession like blacksmithing or carpentry. Learn the angles, master the tools, collect the fees. His father had made it seem simple. Raise the axe, bring it down, gather your payment. Nobody mentioned the weight that accumulated with each swing, invisible but crushing, until breathing itself became labour. The candle flame flickered as Derek turned to a fresh page. Tonight's entry would be different. Tonight he would finally write about the execution that had broken something inside him, the one that transformed his craft from profession to curse. His hand trembled as he dipped the quill again. The young Earl of Salisbury stood before me this morning, he began, 17 years of age, the same as my eldest son. The memory crashed over him like Thames water in flood, the boy's voice cracking as he forgave Derek for what was about to happen, the crowd falling silent when they realized the condemned was barely more than a child. The way morning sun caught the tears on the Earl's cheeks as he knelt at the block. Derek's worst nightmare was about to unfold in public. The first strike had been perfect, should have been perfect. Derek had measured twice, aimed for the spot between the 3rd and 4th vertebrae where his father taught him a clean cut was guaranteed. The axe fell true, but the boy's neck was thin, too thin, and the blade had bitten deep without severing completely. Blood had fountained across the scaffold while the Earl's body convulsed. Still alive, still aware. Those young eyes had rolled toward Derek, with an expression that would haunt him until his own death. Not accusation, but confusion, as if asking why the promised mercy hadn't come. The second strike had been rushed, panicked. Derek's hands shook as he raised the axe again, fighting the bile rising in his throat. This time the blade caught the Earl's shoulder, opening a wound that sprayed the front row of spectators. A woman fainted. A man vomited. The crowd that usually bayed for blood now stood frozen in communal horror. 3 more strikes followed before the job was done. 5 in total. Each one burned into Derek's memory with the clarity of a brand, the way the boy's fingers had clutched at straw. The sound, dear God, the sound of incomplete severance. The moment when mercy became butchery and profession became damnation. Derek set down his quill and reached for the wine flask. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. 15 years he'd wielded the axe, and never had he failed so completely. The Earl's family had paid £20 for a clean death. Instead, they'd witnessed their son's destruction in installments. The other entries in his journal told similar stories, though none quite so devastating. Lady Jane Mortimer, who'd sung hymns until the 3rd strike silenced her. Sir Robert Crane, whose neck had been so thick the axe bounced off twice before finding purchase, each failure meticulously recorded, as if confession to parchment might lighten the weight on Derek's soul. The worst part, he wrote after another pull from the flask, is that they trust us. They kneel before strangers and offer their necks like lambs, believing in our competence. His father had never mentioned the trust, had never explained how it felt when that trust was betrayed by poor aim, or dull blade, or simple human fallibility. The old man had died in his bed, peacefully, taking his nightmares with him. He'd left his son the axe, the hood, and the position, but not the wisdom to bear what came with them. Derek's journal contained more than failed executions. Between the horrors lay observations that revealed the executioner's burden in smaller ways. The protocol of checking the blade while the condemned watched. The etiquette of accepting tips from trembling hands. The moment when you realized the person kneeling before you was someone's child, parent, beloved. Today I executed a woman who looked exactly like my sister, one entry read. Same brown hair, same nervous laugh. When I raised the axe, I saw Margaret's face instead of the stranger's. My aim was true, but my soul missed its mark entirely. The tower's stones seemed to absorb these confessions. Other executioners had worked here, had swung axes in the same courtyard, had returned home to write by candlelight, Did their ghosts read over Derek's shoulder? Did they nod in recognition at his descriptions of sleepless nights and wine-soaked mornings? The journal's margins contained sketches, anatomical drawings of necks from various angles, diagrams of proper stance and swing trajectory, professional notes that revealed Derek's desperate attempts to perfect his craft, to reduce variables that led to the failures that haunted him. But human necks weren't timber. They contained mysteries no amount of study could predict. "The physicians tell us death comes instantly with proper severance," he wrote. "They lie. I've seen heads blink. I've watched lips move in prayer after separation. Whatever animates us doesn't depart as quickly as learned men claim. We executioners know truths that would madden philosophers." One entry stood out for its brevity. "Executed my former neighbour today. He recognized me despite the hood, called me by my childhood name. I managed one strike, but barely." These personal connections made the work unbearable. London wasn't so large that executioners never encountered friends on the scaffold. Derek had developed a habit of studying his feet during the condemned's final words, afraid of meeting familiar eyes. The hood protected his identity from the crowd, but not from those who knew his gait, his height, the way he held his shoulders. The wine flask emptied, as Derek wrote. His handwriting grew looser, more honest. "Sometimes I dream I'm on the scaffold, but I'm holding the axe wrong way round. The blade faces me. The crowd cheers as I swing. I wake tasting iron." Another entry. "My son wants to follow my trade. I'd rather see him hanged than holding this axe. There are cleaner ways to die than by installments of other people's deaths." The execution that would break him forever was scheduled for dawn. Derek didn't know it yet, but in 12 hours he would face a challenge that would make the Earl of Salisbury's death seem merciful by comparison. For now, he wrote of past horrors, unaware that his future held something worse. "The tower takes its toll on all who serve it," his final entry for the night read. "Prisoners, guards, even those of us who only visit to perform our duty. These stones remember every scream, every failed strike, every moment when justice became torture. We're all inmates here. Some of us simply get to leave when the work is done." Derek closed his journal and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring another execution, another name for his ledger, another weight added to his collection. He'd sharpen his axe, check its balance, pray for steady hands and a true strike. The candle guttered out as he settled into uneasy sleep. In his dreams, as always, the faces waited, noble and common alike, young and old, male and female, all watching him with eyes that asked the same question: "Will you grant us mercy, or will we suffer?" Derek thought he'd seen the worst execution possible. He was wrong, because in 1542, an elderly countess would turn scaffold into slaughterhouse, and Thomas Derek would learn that some failures couldn't be measured in strikes alone. The hammering started before sunrise. Carpenters' mallets struck wood in steady rhythm while London slept, each blow echoing across Tower Hill like a countdown to death. Master carpenter William Hawkins wiped sawdust from his eyes and surveyed his crew's progress. 15 feet high, 40 feet square, reinforced joints at every corner. This scaffold could hold the weight of justice and 10,000 witnesses who'd come to watch it delivered. Hawkins had built 17 execution platforms in his 20 years of service to the tower. His hands knew every measurement by feel alone. 8 steps up from ground level, each step exactly 9 inches high to prevent the condemned from stumbling during their final climb. The trapdoor for hangings measured precisely 3 feet by 3 feet, large enough for any body but small enough to maintain structural integrity. His apprentices thought him obsessed with details. They didn't understand that poor construction meant botched executions, and botched executions meant the carpenter's reputation died alongside the condemned. The platform's boards came from Sussex oak, aged 5 years until the wood rang like iron when struck. Hawkins ran his palm along each plank, feeling for splinters that might catch a lady's dress or imperfections that could trip an executioner carrying a heavy axe. The crowd expected theatre, not accidents. One loose board could transform solemn justice into deadly farce. He'd seen it happen at Tyburn, where a poorly built scaffold collapsed mid-hanging, leaving the condemned dangling by their wrists while carpenters scrambled to repair the damage. By dawn, the basic structure stood complete against the grey morning sky. Now came the specialized modifications that separated common gallows from royal execution sites. Iron rings bolted into the platform for securing the block, drainage channels carved into the boards to direct blood away from where dignitaries would stand, a separate platform for musicians who'd play during the condemned's final walk. Even death demanded proper orchestration at the tower. The mathematics of crowd control occupied Hawkins' morning calculations. 10,000 bodies pressing forward meant tons of force against barrier rails. He ordered extra bracing on the crowd-facing side, thick timbers that could withstand a cavalry charge. The last thing London needed was spectators crushed in their enthusiasm to witness noble blood spilled. That had happened in 1493, during the Duke of Buckingham's execution. 30 dead in the crowd collapse, their bodies carted away before the main event could proceed. Hawkins wouldn't have those deaths on his conscience. But one execution would overflow even this massive space. His crew installed the viewing galleries next, raised platforms along both sides where nobility could watch without mingling with commoners. These required finer craftsmanship than the main scaffold. Polished rails, cushioned seats, even small roofs to protect delicate complexions from sun or rain. The Duke of Norfolk had reserved the entire eastern gallery for his retinue, paying £50 to ensure unobstructed sightlines. Bloodsport came with premium seating for those who could afford it. Hawkins assigned his best men to the block installation. This wasn't some crude chopping stump, but a carefully engineered device. The wood came from a single oak heart, no grain lines that might deflect an axe blow. The top surface curved slightly, designed to position the condemned's neck at the optimal angle. Too high and the executioner would miss. Too low and the blade might catch on vertebrae. 4 inches of elevation made the difference between one clean strike and the horrors everyone pretended couldn't happen. The straw arrived by the cartload as morning transformed into afternoon. Fresh golden stalks from Kent, not the rotting stuff used at common executions. This straw would absorb noble blood, become souvenirs for merchants who'd bottle it as medicine, sell it as relics to cure everything from plague to broken hearts. Hawkins spread it himself, creating neat patterns that would disappear the moment they served their purpose. Even the straw placement followed protocol at royal executions. Sound considerations shaped every decision. The platform's boards were tongue and groove joined to eliminate creaking that might obscure the condemned's final words. The stairs included felt padding beneath each step to muffle footfalls during the death march. Hawkins had learned these tricks from French scaffold builders, men who understood that execution was as much about what people heard as what they saw. A squeaking board at the wrong moment could ruin the solemnity authorities required. The specialized additions revealed the execution's true nature. Iron brackets for torches, because this death would happen at dawn when November darkness still clung to London's stones. A wooden screen erected behind the block to prevent blood spray from reaching the gallery spectators. Extra reinforcement around the executioner's position, because this particular headsman was known for his powerful swings that sometimes cracked the scaffold boards. Every modification spoke to lessons learned from previous failures. But Hawkins' most important installation remained hidden beneath the main platform. A secondary structure, almost a cage, where physicians would wait to examine the severed head immediately after separation. The authorities wanted confirmation of death, medical testimony that justice had been served. This under-scaffold chamber included tables for instruments, basins for washing, even a desk where the official report would be written while blood still dripped through the boards above. The machinery of death extended far below what crowds would witness. Testing began as afternoon shadows lengthened. Hawkins walked every inch of the platform, bouncing on boards to check for weakness. His apprentices took turns climbing the stairs, ensuring no step would shift under a condemned person's weight. They positioned the block, removed it, repositioned it, until the placement satisfied Hawkins' exacting standards. A sandbag the weight of a human head dropped from platform height to test the physician's chamber below. Every component faced scrutiny because every component would face history. The crowd barriers went up last, heavy wooden rails that transformed Tower Hill into an amphitheatre of death. These weren't mere fences but carefully engineered crowd control devices, angled to funnel spectators into designated areas, reinforced at stress points where pushing would be greatest, gaps left at specific intervals for vendors to pass through with their wares. Even the merchants selling execution day pies and ale had their place in Hawkins' architectural vision. The viewing hierarchy revealed itself in construction details. Commoners would stand behind barriers 50 feet from the scaffold, close enough to see but not to interfere. Merchants and guildsmen occupied raised platforms 30 feet away, their status buying them clearer views. Nobility sat in covered galleries just 20 feet from where the axe would fall, close enough to hear every prayer, see every tremor, smell the fierce sweat that no perfume could mask. The scaffold's design enforced social order even as it displayed justice. Hawkins saved the final installation for dusk, when fewer eyes watched his work. A small door built into the scaffold's base, invisible from the crowd's angle. This escape route served multiple purposes. Executioners could exit quickly if crowds turned hostile. Physicians could remove body parts without public display. And sometimes, rarely, a last-minute reprieve required getting the condemned off stage before mob disappointment turned violent. The door spoke to contingencies Hawkins prayed would never be needed. His crew completed their work as November stars appeared above London. The scaffold stood ready, a wooden altar to state power that could accommodate any form of judicial death. Hanging, beheading, or the dreaded hanging, drawing and quartering all had their designated spaces on Hawkins' platform. The versatility was intentional. Tomorrow's execution might be a simple beheading, but next week could bring more elaborate requirements. The scaffold stayed ready for whatever justice demanded. The crowd that day would witness something unprecedented. Payment arrived before Hawkins' crew packed their tools. £40 for 2 days' work, more than most carpenters earned in a year. The tower paid promptly and well for quality construction. Hawkins divided the sum among his men, keeping the largest share but ensuring everyone profited from their proximity to death. Building scaffolds had made him wealthy, though wealth couldn't purchase peaceful sleep when he remembered what his platforms enabled. That night, Hawkins returned alone to inspect his handiwork one final time. The empty scaffold loomed against starlight, a geometric shadow that would soon frame history. He climbed the stairs slowly, testing each step again, running his hands along rails that would guide someone to their death come morning. At the top, he stood where the condemned would stand, looking out at the space where thousands would gather to watch a life end. The block drew him like a lodestone. Hawkins knelt beside it, checking its placement once more, ensuring the grain ran correctly. The height was perfect, the surface unmarred. His fingers found initials carved into the wood's underside. T. D. Thomas Derrick, the executioner who'd commissioned this particular block, marking his tools like any craftsman. The two men had never met, but their work intertwined intimately. Hawkins built the stage. Derrick provided the performance. Wind swept across Tower Hill, rattling the barriers and making the platform creak despite all engineering efforts to silence it. The sound reminded Hawkins of shipmasts in a storm, that same sense of powerful forces barely contained by human construction. Tomorrow, this scaffold would contain different forces. The weight of law, the pressure of tradition, the terrible momentum of justice that, once begun, allowed no deviation from its course. He descended the stairs and locked the access door, pocketing the key that he'd deliver to tower authorities at dawn. His work was complete. The stage was set. Tomorrow, others would play their roles upon it. The condemned climbing those felt-padded steps, the executioner testing his axe's weight, the crowd pressing against barriers Hawkins had reinforced, the physicians waiting in their hidden chamber, all the players in England's theatre of death, performing on a platform built to outlast them all. As Hawkins walked home through London's narrow streets, he thought about the mathematics of his trade. 17 scaffolds in 20 years, roughly 300 executions performed on his constructions. Each one a person who'd climbed stairs he'd built, stood on platforms he'd measured, died on blocks he'd installed. The numbers should have been just numbers, but faces attached themselves to his calculations. The young earl who'd kissed the scaffold steps. The duchess who'd had to be carried up, too weak from tower imprisonment to walk. The merchant who'd tried to address the crowd but found his voice stolen by terror. His wife asked about his day when he arrived home. Hawkins told her about wood grain and joint reinforcement, technical details that avoided the platform's purpose. She knew, of course. The whole street knew William Hawkins built London's killing grounds, but they maintained the fiction that he was simply a carpenter with government contracts, that his exceptional income came from exceptional skill rather than exceptional proximity to death. Sleep came slowly, when it came at all. Hawkins dreamed of scaffolds that grew like trees, sprouting new platforms from every joint, expanding until they covered all of Tower Hill, all of London, endless wooden galleries where endless crowds gathered to watch endless executions. He woke to November rain pattering on his roof, washing his careful construction clean for its morning baptism. All this infrastructure, all these spectators, would culminate in the most horrific failure in execution history, and it started with a nervous executioner and a running countess. The guard's log was precise. 3:03 a.m., 2 boys in white nightshirts, matching exactly the 1483 inventory of the murdered prince's belongings. Security officer Michael Pritchard stared at the entry he'd just written, his pen trembling above the paper. 20 years patrolling the tower's midnight corridors, and nothing had prepared him for what he'd witnessed in the bloody tower's upper chamber. The temperature gauge on the wall had registered 68 degrees Fahrenheit when Pritchard began his rounds at 2:30. Standard autumn warmth for the ancient stones that retained heat from thousands of tourist bodies during the day. His footsteps echoed on the spiral stairs as he climbed toward the room where Edward V and his brother Richard had spent their final nights before vanishing into history. Routine check, routine night, until the air changed. The drop came suddenly. Pritchard watched his breath fog as the gauge plummeted past 50, past 40, settling at 35 degrees in less than 3 minutes. His radio crackled with static that formed patterns like whispered words. The flashlight beam wavered, though he gripped it steady, throwing shadows that moved independent of his movements. 2 small figures materialized near the window alcove, where archaeologists had found children's toys in 1978. Not transparent like movie ghosts, but solid, casting their own shadows in the flashlight beam. Boys of 12 and 9, wearing nightshirts that matched textile descriptions from royal wardrobe records. Their feet left no prints on the dusty floor, but Pritchard heard each footfall distinctly, bare soles on stone that had supported their living weight 5 centuries ago. The younger boy turned first, and Pritchard stumbled backward at the recognition in those eyes. Not the blank stare of something dead, but the curious gaze of a child interrupted at play. The older boy, protective even in death, stepped between Pritchard and his brother, one hand extended as if to ward off another intrusion into their eternal evening. Time collapsed in that chamber. Pritchard's digital watch stopped at 3:03. The boys moved through activities that belonged to summer 1483, playing chess with pieces that weren't there, reading from books that existed only in their shared memory. The guard pressed himself against the wall, afraid to breathe too loudly, watching history replay itself in an endless loop that ignored the passage of centuries. His partner found him there at 3:20, sitting on the floor with tears freezing on his cheeks. The temperature had returned to normal. The boys had faded with the cold, but the chess pieces they'd been moving, Pritchard swore he could still hear them clicking against an invisible board. The incident report ran 4 pages, co-signed by 3 other guards who'd experienced similar encounters over the years. Building maintenance checked the heating system and found no malfunction. The security cameras showed only Pritchard entering an empty room, reacting to nothing visible on tape. Yet the timestamp glitched at exactly 3:03, same as his watch, same as every timepiece that entered that chamber during an appearance. Word spread through the yeoman warders like Thames fog. The princes appeared most often in October, the month they'd likely died, always at 3:03. Always in those same nightshirts described in their household inventory. Sometimes playing, sometimes praying, sometimes simply standing at the window staring down at the Thames where their bodies might have been disposed. Each sighting followed the same pattern. Temperature crash, time stop, 2 boys ignoring 500 years of death. Pritchard requested reassignment to day shifts only. His supervisor understood. Half the night guards had similar restrictions in their files. Chambers they wouldn't enter after dark, corners they'd patrol only in pairs. The tower's ghosts weren't rumours or tourist attractions to those who walked these passages when darkness fell. They were occupational hazards as real as loose stones or rusted gates. The official tower position remained skeptical. No such things as ghosts. Temperature variations came from ancient ventilation systems. Guards imagined things during long, lonely shifts. But the logs told different stories. Sightings clustered around significant dates: October for the princes, May 19th for Anne Boleyn, November dates for others who'd died here. The dead kept calendars that superseded any rational explanation. Maintenance crews reported their own encounters. Electricians replacing wiring in the bloody tower found their equipment malfunctioning whenever they worked near the prince's chamber. Modern tools failed in spaces where medieval murders occurred. One contractor quit mid-job after his drill bits melted for no apparent reason, the metal pooling on stones that had once pooled with royal blood. The princes represented the tower's gentlest haunting. No malevolence in their appearances, just two boys preserved at the moment before violence found them. Other spirits carried their deaths with them. The White Lady in the White Tower, temperature dropping 20 degrees as she passed. The ghostly cylinder of light that guards called Anne Boleyn, rolling across Tower Green where her scaffold once stood. Each ghost a fragment of violence that refused to dissipate. Scientists attempted explanations. Underground water creating temperature variations, electromagnetic fields from modern equipment, interacting with iron deposits in medieval stones. Collective hallucinations brought on by workplace stress and historical knowledge. Every theory crumbled against the specificity of the sightings. How did electromagnetic fields know to manifest at 3:03? Why did temperature drops correspond to execution anniversaries? But the boys weren't the only ones returning to claim their space in the tower's eternal present. Pritchard's replacement on night shift, David Chen, lasted exactly 1 week before requesting transfer. His report described entering the prince's chamber at 2:55 a.m., finding it already cold. The boys were there, but this time they weren't alone. A figure stood behind them, tall and indistinct, wearing what might have been a guard's uniform from any century. The boys played while this figure watched, and Chen understood with terrible clarity that he was seeing their last moment of peace before their historical exit. The tower's haunting operated on rules nobody fully grasped. Some guards saw nothing during entire careers. Others attracted spirits like magnets drew iron filings. Pritchard fell into the second category. After the princes, he encountered the ghost of Lady Arbella Stuart in the Queen's house, singing lullabies to an infant that existed only in her grief-maddened mind. He glimpsed the yeoman warder who died in 1648, still making his rounds with a partisan that struck sparks from modern stones. Each encounter left its mark. Guards developed thousand-yard stares, jumping at shadows that might be more than shadows. They shared coping strategies over pints at the Yeoman Warders Club. Never acknowledge them directly. Don't run. It triggers something predatory in the violent ones. Keep iron in your pocket, though nobody could explain why it helped. Above all, respect their space. The living were temporary custodians. The dead held permanent residence. The prince's chamber required special protocols. No single guard entered after midnight. The heating system stayed manual override between October and November. Cleaning crews worked only during daylight, and even then in pairs. These weren't official policies, just accumulated wisdom from decades of 3 a.m. encounters that left rational people questioning rationality itself. Modern technology made the hauntings worse, not better. Digital equipment failed more dramatically than mechanical. Smartphones died instantly in certain chambers. Security cameras recorded static that formed patterns resembling faces. The tower's new alarm system triggered constantly until technicians learned to exclude specific rooms from motion sensors. The building itself rejected 21st-century intrusions into its medieval grief. Tourists occasionally glimpsed what guards saw nightly. A child visitor in 2015 photographed the prince's chamber and captured 2 translucent figures her parents hadn't seen. The image went viral before tower authorities could suppress it. Analysis showed no digital manipulation, though skeptics found endless alternative explanations. The boys in the photograph wore the same nightshirts Pritchard had described, stood in the same positions guards had reported for decades. The cold returned even as Chen wrote his report. 35 degrees in seconds, his breath misting as he scribbled details. This time, the tall figure behind the boys moved, reaching toward them with hands that might have been gloved or might have been something worse. The boys continued their eternal play, unaware that death stood behind them, patient as stone, inevitable as sunrise. What happened next made seasoned guards request transfers to any posting that didn't involve night shifts in the bloody tower. The temperature crashed to 28 degrees. Ice formed on the inside of windows that had been sealed for decades. Chen's flashlight died, leaving only moonlight to illuminate a scene that belonged to August 1483. The tall figure's hand settled on the younger prince's shoulder. The boy didn't react, couldn't react, trapped in the moment before awareness of danger. But Chen saw what came next, or almost saw it, his mind refusing to process details that would have sent him screaming from the tower forever. The dead princes were tragic but peaceful. Other tower ghosts carried their violence with them, especially one headless queen who stalked the chapel where she died, her appearances preceded by the sound of silk rustling across stones that had drunk her blood. The axe struck wood, not flesh. Strike 4 embedded deep in the scaffold platform as Margaret Pole twisted away from her executioner's desperate swing. The crowd's roar turned to gasps of horror. Even hardened tower guards, who'd witnessed dozens of beheadings, had never seen anything like this grotesque chase unfolding before 10,000 witnesses. The mathematics of execution assumed cooperation. Every scaffold designer calculated angles based on kneeling prisoners who held position. Every executioner trained on straw dummies that didn't dodge or run. The geometry of death required stillness from the condemned, dignity in their final moments that made the executioner's job a matter of simple mechanics. Margaret Pole shattered every equation. Strike 5 whistled through empty air where her head had been a heartbeat earlier. The 67-year-old countess moved with desperate agility, her age forgotten in the face of immediate death. Blood from the shoulder wound painted abstract patterns on the scaffold boards as she scrambled away from the block. The executioner stumbled after her, his heavy axe throwing him off balance with each missed swing. The scaffold measured 40 feet square, but panic made it feel infinite. Margaret ran along the platform's edge, while spectators pressed backward, trying to escape potential blood spray. Noble ladies in the viewing galleries screamed behind perfumed handkerchiefs. Merchants who'd paid premium prices for clear sightlines now wished themselves anywhere else. The carefully orchestrated theatre of state justice had devolved into something primitive and terrible. Statistical analysis of tower executions showed 92% succeeded on the first strike. Another 6% required a second blow. Only 2% ever needed 3 attempts. Margaret Pole was rewriting those percentages with every desperate dodge, creating a new category of failure that record keepers would struggle to classify. Strike 6 caught her hair, shearing off a grey lock that floated like ash in the morning breeze. The near miss sent her careening toward the opposite corner of the scaffold. The executioner's training had never covered moving targets. His muscle memory, developed through thousands of practice swings, betrayed him when faced with a victim who refused to accept victimhood. The crowd's psychology shifted with each failed attempt. Initial bloodlust transformed into collective horror. Some turned away, unable to watch an elderly woman hunted like an animal. Others stood transfixed, witnessing the moment when execution revealed its true nature. The thin veneer of judicial process peeled away, exposing the raw brutality beneath. Strike 7 changed everything. The blade caught Margaret's back as she tried to dodge past her pursuer. Not a killing blow, but enough to send her sprawling onto the blood-slicked boards. The executioner raised his axe for what surely must be the final strike. The crowd held its breath. Even the morning birds fell silent. She rolled away at the last second. Strike 8 split the space where she'd fallen, sending splinters flying like wooden shrapnel, several embedded in the executioner's leather apron. Margaret somehow found her feet again, though her grey dress now showed crimson patterns that expanded with each movement. The scaffold had become a battlefield with only one possible outcome, yet she continued fighting against mathematical certainty. The executioner's physical exhaustion showed in his stance. Each swing of the 7-pound axe drained energy he couldn't spare. Sweat poured down his face beneath the black hood. His arms trembled with fatigue. The tool, designed for single decisive strikes, became heavier with each failure, its weight multiplying along with his shame. Tower protocol required executioners to maintain composure regardless of circumstances. The hood existed partly to hide any emotion that might humanize the state's instrument of death. But Margaret Pole's execution stripped away all pretense. Witnesses could see the executioner's shoulders shaking, though whether from exhaustion or something deeper remained unclear. Strike 9 demonstrated the complete breakdown of technique. The executioner swung wildly, abandoning any pretense of aimed precision. The blade glanced off Margaret's shoulder at an angle that would have merely wounded even if it had connected properly. She stumbled but didn't fall, her will to survive overriding every physical limitation of age and injury. By strike 10, even the crowd was screaming for mercy. Voices rose from every direction, begging the executioner to stop, pleading for guards to intervene, praying for some authority to end this torture. The same spectators who'd arrived eager for noble blood now understood they were witnessing something that transcended mere execution. They were watching the machinery of state justice malfunction in the most horrible way possible. The executioner stood frozen after his 10th failure, axe hanging loose in trembling hands. Margaret Pole lay before him, no longer running but still breathing, still moving, still fundamentally alive despite wounds that should have ended any resistance. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating a scaffold transformed into an abattoir. Blood pooled in the drainage channels William Hawkins had so carefully carved. The straw meant to absorb noble blood had scattered during the chase, leaving bare wood that showed every crimson footprint. 9 strikes, 10 strikes, and still the Countess lived. What happened with the 11th would haunt everyone present, especially the man holding the axe. The imperial state crown weighed 7 pounds, but its true weight could be measured in colonial deaths. 2,868 diamonds, each one clawed from African earth by men who'd never see their families again. 421 pearls, harvested by divers who held their breath until lungs burst, all for gems that would decorate a monarch's head. The centerpiece, St. Edward's sapphire, had adorned royal skulls since Edward the Confessor, accumulating centuries of blood debt that compound interest could never calculate. Tower Jewel housekeeper Martin Blackwood polished each stone with movements inherited from his predecessors. The cleaning cloth in his hand had buffed these same surfaces for 40 years, removing fingerprints of tourists who pressed against reinforced glass for glimpses of empire crystallized. Every morning at 6 a.m., before the public arrived, he entered the vault where Britain stored its shiniest atrocities. The Cullinan diamond caught morning light through barred windows, throwing rainbow patterns across walls that had contained prisoners' screams. At 3,106 carats in its original form, the stone represented approximately 9,000 African miners' deaths, based on mortality rates from the premier mine where it was discovered. Blackwood's predecessor had calculated the ratio during a whiskey-fueled confession: 3 deaths per carat for stones over 100 carats, extracted from depths where cave-ins killed faster than disease. The keeper's daily ritual included counting, not just gems, though he knew every stone's position by memory, but the absent spaces where stolen jewels once rested. The Black Prince's ruby, actually a spinel, had survived Cromwell's Commonwealth only because a guard hid it in his chamber pot. The crown's velvet lining still showed faint stains from that undignified concealment, though tourists never learned why certain sections appeared darker than others. But the crown's deadliest gem had a specific name that still made African miners cross themselves. The Koh-i-Noor diamond glittered with particular malevolence from the Queen Mother's crown. 105 carats of cursed carbon that had decorated the turbans of murdered Mughal emperors, the necks of assassinated Persian shahs, the finger of a Sikh Maharaja who died mysteriously after signing it over to Victoria. Every owner except British queens had met violent ends, as if the stone carried its own execution warrant for any man who dared possess it. Blackwood's cleaning routine followed protocols established in 1852, when the tower became the crown jewel's permanent vault: Polish clockwise, never counter. Use only cloths blessed by the Archbishop of Canterbury. a tradition born from medieval fears that demonic influences might attach to objects soaked in so much historical blood. Check each setting for looseness that might indicate tampering. Count the ravens outside to ensure the kingdom's luck held. 6 live birds plus 1 spare, fed fresh meat daily at crown expense while London's poor survived on crusts. The tower's transformation into the Jewel's Fortress had required modifications that turned medieval chambers into modern vaults. Steel doors 3 feet thick replaced wooden gates. Pressure sensors lined floors where princes once played. Motion detectors watched spaces where ghosts allegedly walked, though security footage showed the devices triggering at empty air with suspicious regularity. The basement strongroom's temperature stayed constant through technology that cost more annually than feeding all of Tower Hamlet's orphans. Insurance valuers had attempted calculating the collection's worth. The numbers became meaningless beyond certain thresholds. How did one price the ring worn by Edward the Confessor, stolen from his corpse by Henry II? What was the market value of Queen Elizabeth I's pearl earrings? Each drop formed in oysters that Persian slaves dove to their deaths collecting. The crown jewels transcended monetary evaluation. They were crystallized conquest, empire reduced to its glittering essence. Blackwood knew stories the tour guides never shared. The sovereign's orb, that golden ball topped with amethyst crosses, had rolled from Charles I's dead fingers after his execution. The scepter's diamond had been pried from a Hindu temple idol, while devotees were massacred for protesting. Every piece in the collection carried similar provenance, beauty built on brutality that polishing could never remove. The ravens watched through barred windows as Blackwood worked. Their presence bothered him more than any ghost story. 6 birds minimum, the legend demanded, or the kingdom would fall. The tower's raven master fed them 2 pounds of raw meat daily, plus biscuits soaked in blood, the only prisoners who ate better than their guards. Their wings were clipped to prevent escape, turning symbols of freedom into feathered inmates serving life sentences for crimes they'd never committed. The spare raven perched separately, waiting to replace any bird that died. This creature existed in perpetual readiness for a promotion that required another's death. Blackwood had named it Substitute, though officially ravens received grander titles like Branwen and Munin. Substitute understood its role with corvid intelligence that made its patience particularly unsettling. The bird watched everything with eyes that held too much comprehension, as if it knew empires rose and fell but ravens endured. What happened to those who tried to steal it defied explanation, starting with Colonel Blood's attempt of 1671. The vault's security system recorded everything, but some incidents never made official reports. In 1994, a cleaner reached towards St. Edward's crown during after-hours maintenance. The cameras showed him freezing mid-gesture, arm extended, face contorted in terror at something beyond the frame. He stood paralyzed for 17 minutes until guards found him. The man never spoke again, spending his remaining years drawing pictures of eyes, thousands of staring eyes, covering every surface he could reach. Another attempt in 2008 involved professional thieves who disabled every modern security measure. They reached the jewel room's threshold before something stopped them. Security footage showed the men backing away from an empty doorway, hands raised as if surrendering to invisible authority. One dropped to his knees and began praying in Polish. They retreated without taking anything, later confessing to police rather than face whatever waited in that vault. Their testimony mentioned cold that burned and voices speaking languages that predated human speech. Blackwood finished polishing the imperial state crown as 7 a.m. approached. Time to secure the display before tourists arrived with their cameras and questions. He placed the crown on its cushion with movements that had become ritual. 7 pounds of gold and gems that represented millions of deaths across centuries. The weight never changed, but Blackwood swore it grew heavier each year, as if accumulating interest on its debt of souls. The first tour group was already assembling outside, eager to glimpse treasures that photography couldn't capture. They'd see glittering symbols of monarchy, hear sanitized histories of conquest presented as civilization's march. They wouldn't learn about the African children who died in diamond mines, the pearl divers whose lungs filled with seawater, the Indian craftsmen blinded after completing their work so they could never create such beauty again. Modern tower admission cost £29.50, the Jewel House tour added another surcharge. Gift shop crown replicas started at £45 for plastic, £300 for silver-plated versions. The tower had monetized its blood-soaked history into a profitable heritage industry. Every ticket sold, every souvenir purchased, added to the same ledger that began with William the Conqueror extracting Saxon labour at sword point. But the real economics of the tower emerged in subtler calculations. The crown jewels attracted 3 million visitors annually. Each tourist spent an average of £97 on tickets, tours and souvenirs. The ravens consumed £730 of meat yearly, their upkeep costing more than a minimum wage salary. The climate control for the Jewel House ran £50,000 monthly, every expense justified by tourist revenue that exceeded operational costs by margins that would make medieval merchants weep with envy. The tower had discovered its final transformation. From fortress to palace to prison to zoo to tourist attraction, each evolution building on the bones of the previous incarnation. Now it stood as London's most profitable monument to monetized murder, where visitors paid premium prices to gawk at execution sites and instruments of torture rebranded as historical artifacts. The gift shop sold Tower of London teddy bears wearing Beefeater costumes. Children bought candy axes. Couples took selfies on Tower Green where queens lost their heads. All this wealth, all this death, all this history converged on one May morning in 1541, when Margaret Pole walked to Tower Hill for what should have been a simple beheading. The ravens watched from their perches. The crowd assembled with their usual bloodthirsty anticipation. The executioner tested his axe's weight one final time. Nobody suspected they were about to witness the complete breakdown of the Tudor death machine, about to see what happened when the condemned refused to cooperate with their own ending. The 11th strike changed everything. The executioner brought the axe down with all his remaining strength, abandoning technique for sheer force. The blade finally found its mark, but at an angle that made veteran soldiers in the crowd turn away. Margaret Pole's body convulsed once more before stillness finally claimed the scaffold. The morning air hung thick with metallic smell and collective shock. 10,000 witnesses stood frozen, their bloodlust transformed into something closer to shame. The executioner dropped his axe, the clatter of metal on wood echoing across Tower Hill like a final accusation. His hands shook so violently that removing his hood proved impossible. Women in the viewing galleries wept openly. Men who'd cheered at the spectacle's beginning now stared at their feet, unable to process what they'd witnessed. The chase around the scaffold, the desperate dodging, the mounting horror of each failed strike, Arthur said. This wasn't execution. This was butchery wearing the mask of justice. The executioner fled the scaffold without collecting his fee. Guards later found him at the Thames waterfront, trying to wash blood from hands that would never feel clean again. Within 3 days, he'd abandoned his profession entirely, taking vows at a monastery where he spent his remaining years praying for forgiveness that never came. Margaret Pole's death marked the moment when Tudor justice revealed its true face to London. The machinery of state-sanctioned death, so carefully choreographed to appear civilized, had broken down completely. What remained was an elderly woman hunted like prey while thousands watched, their entertainment paid for with her agony. The scaffold crew worked in silence, mopping blood that had spread far beyond the drainage channels. The straw meant to absorb noble death lay scattered and useless, trampled during the chase. Carpenters would later find axe marks in places no execution should have reached, scars in the wood that mapped Margaret's desperate flight path. Word of the botched execution spread through London faster than plague. Taverns fell silent when witnesses tried describing what they'd seen. The usual execution ballads, those cheerful songs about traitors meeting justice, never emerged. Street poets, who normally capitalized on scaffold drama, found themselves unable to craft verses around such absolute failure of dignity. The crowd dispersed without the usual pushing and celebration. They filed away in small groups, speaking in whispers when they spoke at all. Parents hurried children past the scaffold's shadow. Merchants packed their wares without attempting final sales. Even the pickpockets who worked execution crowds abandoned their trade for the day, as if theft seemed insignificant after witnessing such sanctioned brutality. Henry VIII received the execution report that afternoon. Courtiers described his rage at learning his orders had been carried out so poorly. The king who'd orchestrated Anne Boleyn's elegant death by French sword now faced the reality of what execution truly meant when stripped of its theatrical polish. Margaret Pole hadn't been granted the mercy of professional precision. She'd died in installments, each strike a separate cruelty. The executioner who'd fled to monastery walls wasn't the only one seeking sanctuary. 3 guards requested transfers from Tower duty. 2 witnesses entered religious life within the month. A court lady who'd watched from the premium galleries never attended another public event, spending her remaining years in seclusion. Margaret Pole's death created ripples of trauma that spread through every level of society that had participated, willingly or not, in her destruction. Modern historians would later calculate the statistics. 11 strikes made Margaret Pole's execution the worst documented failure in Tower history. The previous record stood at 5 strikes for the Duke of Monmouth in 1685. But numbers couldn't capture what witnesses experienced that May morning: the sound of an axe repeatedly missing its mark, the sight of noble blood-painting patterns no artist would recreate, the knowledge that justice and murder were separated only by successful technique. The Tower adapted, as it always did. New executioners received expanded training that included protocols for uncooperative condemned. Scaffold designers added features to prevent victims from moving freely. The machinery of death incorporated lessons from its failures, becoming more efficient at containing the chaos that Margaret Pole had unleashed. But efficiency couldn't erase memory. Today, Tower visitors walk past the memorial marking where Margaret Pole died. The plaque mentions her name, her title, her date of death. It says nothing about the chase, the 11 strikes, the executioner who never wielded an axe again. Tour guides share sanitized versions when asked, speaking of difficulties and delays that transform torture into bureaucratic inconvenience. The Tower of London stands now as Europe's most visited execution site. Its gift shop selling Tower-branded merchandise steps from where Margaret ran for her life. Tourists pay £29.50 to walk grounds where death came priced by the stroke. They photograph themselves at Tower Green, unaware they're standing where drainage channels once carried noble blood toward the Thames. The ravens still patrol these stones, 6 birds plus 1 spare, their wings clipped to ensure they never escape their role as feathered wardens. Legend says the kingdom falls if the ravens flee. Nobody mentions that their ancestors fed on execution remains, that their presence links directly to the Tower's years as London's busiest slaughterhouse. The birds remember what tourists forget. At night, security guards report temperature drops in specific locations: the Bloody Tower where princes vanished, the chapel where queens prayed before dying, Tower Green, where scaffolds rose and fell with each royal whim. They log these incidents matter-of-factly, just as their predecessors recorded executions and torture sessions. The Tower's business has always been death. Only the pricing model changed. Margaret Pole's execution marked the end of illusions about noble death. No French swordsman could make murder elegant. No amount of protocol could disguise what happened when the state decided someone should die. Her desperate flight around that scaffold stripped away centuries of ceremony to reveal the barbarism beneath. 11 strikes to kill one 67-year-old woman, while 10,000 watched. That was Tudor justice without its mask. The mathematics were simple in the end. £3 for the scaffold construction, £4 for the executioner, who fled to holy orders, clean-up costs, crowd control, administrative overhead. The Tower had perfected its accounting of death, every expense itemized, every death monetized. But some costs couldn't be calculated in sterling. The trauma that rippled through witnesses, the executioner who never stopped seeing Margaret's face. The moment when English justice revealed itself as nothing more than murder with documentation. In July, exactly 2 months after Margaret Pole's death, frost formed on Tower Green despite summer heat. Guards found ice crystals tracing the outline of a scaffold that had been dismantled weeks before. The frozen boundary measured 40 feet square, exactly matching William Hawkins' construction specifications. The frost lasted until dawn, melting as July sun climbed above London's skyline. The Tower remembers everything, every scream absorbed by stone, every drop of blood that seeped between cobbles. every desperate chase around scaffolds built to contain dignity that refused containment. Tourists come seeking history sanitized into entertainment. They find instead a monument to monetized murder, where gift shops sell souvenirs from England's bloodiest marketplace. Margaret Pole ran for her life on that May morning in 1541. She died anyway, as the tower always ensured its condemned would die. But she died on her terms, fighting until the 11th strike ended what the first should have accomplished. In those terrible minutes between first wound and final blow, she transformed execution from ceremony into truth. The Tower of London had built its reputation on controlled death. Margaret Pole's chase exposed the lie beneath that control. The frost still forms sometimes on Tower Green, always in July, always tracing scaffold dimensions. 40 feet square of frozen remembrance in summer heat. Security logs note these incidents without explanation. Just another oddity in a fortress built on bones, funded by death, maintained by tourism, that transforms atrocity into attraction. The tower endures, as it always has, counting its profits in pounds sterling and uncounted souls.